On July 15th of 2003, the world was introduced to a new RPG developed by Bioware. The RPG was Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic. The game, which is set 4,000 years prior to the movies, received universal acclaim for its rich storytelling, compelling moral choices, and interesting characters. To this day, Knights is considered one of the greatest RPGs of all time. On December 6th of 2004, Knights of the Old Republic 2 was released, providing players with a continuation to the story. This time, however, the game was developed by Obsidian Entertainment, not Bioware. And that was it. That was the last we heard about the Knights series, until October 21st of 2008.
You don't need to be impressed with what I've done. You need to be afraid of what I'm going to do.
Welcome to the Endgame. Today we're talking about Star Wars: The Old Republic. There was something about the world of the Knights series that was just so enthralling. It made you want to lose yourself within it, and that's what Bioware was aiming for with its new MMO, The Old Republic. The game was released on December 20th of 2011 with a subscription model, and people loved it, for the most part. The storytelling was amazing, and each class had its own unique story. The problem, however, was the endgame. Once players finished playing through their class stories, they realized the game had very little left to offer, so they left. In March of 2012, the population dropped to 1.7 million, and by the time the free-to-play model was released in November of 2012, the game reportedly had well under 500,000 players. Here we are now, 4 years and 6 expansions later, with the latest expansion having been released earlier this month. The free-to-play model, as well as Bioware's changes and expansions, saved the game. However, the Old Republic is infamous for having one of the worst and most restrictive free-to-play models around. I'll have a list of all the restrictions and differences in the description, but for the sake of this video, I'll discuss the game from the perspective of a subscriber. The combat in the Old Republic is a traditional tab targeting system you'd expect from games such as WoW or Lord of the Rings Online. Although the decision to go with the tab targeting system as opposed to an action combat system may seem odd at first for a Star Wars game, it's important to remember that this game began development at a time when tab targeting MMOs were leading the market. At that time, everybody wanted to be the next WoW. On top of that, I feel like this was the natural evolution for the combat system of the original Knights games, which had a real-time turn-based combat system. Before setting off in the Star Wars universe, you'll be asked to choose between the Galactic Republic and the Sith Empire. Each faction has 4 base classes, and each of those has 2 advanced classes for a total of 8 per faction and 16 overall. Each one of these 16 classes then has 3 combat proficiencies to choose from. These proficiencies can drastically change the way your class works, so it's important to do a bit of research before choosing one. That being said, if you end up choosing a proficiency you don't like, or you want to try out the others, you can change at any time by visiting a skill mentor in your faction fleet. It's also important to remember that the stories only differ for the base classes and not the advanced classes. Once you've decided on your class, you'll set off on your adventure and travel from planet to planet, completing various quests and objectives. As you progress through your story, you'll eventually be joined by 5 companions unique to your class. Companions, however, have gone through a bit of a change recently. Originally, each companion used to be either a healer, a tank, or a DPS. Since you didn't unlock them all at once, you kinda had to play with what you had. Since each companion had its own likes and dislikes and would occasionally chime in, there would be situations where you had to play with companions you hated because you needed them at that time. Even though you hated them, you had to work on gearing them up, talking to them, giving them gifts and doing their missions. You'd build relationships with them, and eventually what started off as a compromise would turn into a bond. With the new change, companions no longer have set specs and no longer require gear. You can change any companion to healer, tank, or DPS at any time outside of combat, and gear is purely cosmetic. From an MMO standpoint, this is a great change. It's more efficient for the player, but from a story and immersion standpoint, this was a horrible decision. You now have no reason to play with companions you dislike, making the entire system feel shallow. You just take whatever companion you prefer and set it to the spec the situation calls for. The only reason you'd want to work on any other companion's affection level is for crew skill bonuses. Crew skills are your crafting and gathering professions and are mainly handled by your companions. Free-to-play players can have 1 crew skill, preferred have 2, and subscribers get 3. There are 6 crafting skills, 4 gathering skills, and 4 mission skills that require you to send companions on missions to gather materials or items. Crew skills are a great way to make money and craft better mods for your gear. The gear in the Old Republic is a bit different than most other MMOs. You have the usual light, medium, and heavy armor, but you also get adaptive armor. Adaptive armor is essentially armor with no stats that anybody can wear. The way adaptive armor works is that you insert 3 different types of mods: armoring, stat mod, and enhancement. These can be crafted or bought from NPCs. This gives versatility in how you build your gear, and you can switch out mods at any time. And yes, you also have adaptive weapons with colored crystal slots, so don't worry, you'll be able to get the lightsaber of your dreams. Now, all this is well and good, but there is more to the game than just running around cutting up wampas left and right. If you're into space battles, this game's got you covered. You have 2 types of space battles. First, you have space missions, which are on-rails PvE missions where you fight using your class spaceship. Second, and most interesting, are Starfighter PvP missions, which I'll talk about in the PvP section. These game modes are a lot of fun and can help break up the monotonous grind that is all too prevalent in MMOs. If you ever get tired of doing quest after quest and feel like doing something different, then this is a good option. Your other option would of course be dungeons, which you can queue for starting at level 10. These dungeons are called flashpoints and come in 3 difficulties: Story, Veteran, and Master. The Story difficulty is what you'll be playing through until level 50. Starting at 50, you'll gain access to the Veteran difficulty. And don't worry about your level when queuing for Veteran dungeons, as you're instantly scaled up to the Flashpoint level. Flashpoints will generally give you some very good gear that'll help you out while leveling, so it's probably worth doing a couple Flashpoints every 10 levels or so.
I was looking for a hyperdrive matrix processor assembly. You probably haven't seen one in here. I'll keep looking.
If you've heard of anything regarding the Old Republic, it's probably going to be the story. This game has a reputation in the MMO community for having one of the best stories of any MMO, and with good reason. Each class in the game has its own unique story, spanning 3 chapters and 50 levels. What differentiates this from other MMOs, however, is the alignment and choice systems within the game.
Tell me about this meeting place.
I'll give you the coordinates.
While communicating with NPCs, you'll be presented with 3 different options as to how you can respond, and some of these options can actually alter your story, albeit slightly. Occasionally, some of the choices you'll get will be accompanied by the alignment system that will give you either dark or light points depending on your choice. Unfortunately, your options often boil down to kill him or spare him. Now, obviously, not all alignment choices are quite that shallow. However, early on, it can definitely feel like those are the only choices that matter. The first chapter can feel like it drags on and none of what you're doing actually makes any difference, and because of this, I feel like the game truly shines once you reach the second chapter around level 30. Chapter 2 is when you can truly start to see the repercussions to the choices you've made, and the story starts to unfold into something deeper and more interesting. Now obviously, I can't speak for all the classes, but that was definitely the case with the Jedi Knight and the Sith Inquisitor, in my opinion. The story doesn't have to revolve exclusively around your class missions. Each planet you visit will also have a story of its own for you to experience. These stories can be fairly long, at times longer than your class mission on that particular planet. They're by no means required for your main story, but if you're interested in the world, it's worth doing them once. Keep in mind, however, that these stories are the same for every class of a faction. My biggest gripe with the storytelling would have to be the conversation choices.
Look at what your honor and duty has led to. You don't owe that maniac anything.
You could kill me, but refuse. Not out of fear, but compassion.
You never know what your character is actually going to say, and more often than not, it's completely different from what you've chosen, with only the context being kept. Something that seems like a perfectly innocent comment may easily come out as a sarcastic, even snarky remark from your character. It's frustrating, And I can't understand why they chose to go with this system. The original Knights game had a silent protagonist and had the entire response written out. When you chose a response, you knew exactly what you were getting into. What was wrong with that system? Why did Bioware feel the need to replace it with this confusing mess? I realize that this may seem like something silly to be bothered by, but never knowing what your character is going to say isn't exactly pleasant. Another issue the game has is reusing the same pieces of dialogue for different situations. Originally, I was wondering why my character's responses felt inorganic at times, but then I paid closer attention. Although a lot of your character's dialogue is unique to the conversation, your character seems to also have a library of generic responses. A good example would be my Jedi Knight. I chose to play a Dark Jedi Knight, and often when I threatened to kill someone, my character would just spit out the usual line of dialogue.
Any problem I can solve with a lightsaber is a good one.
Although this is understandable considering the sheer amount of dialogue the game contains, I still found it bothersome. That being said, I didn't notice any reused dialogue in the last two expansions, Fallen Empire and Eternal Throne. Speaking of the expansions, so that's where I feel the game's story truly shines. The last two expansions feel like what Knights 3 could have been, in my opinion. Choices matter more than ever, with your choices holding real weight that carries over throughout the story. Each chapter is around an hour in length, and both expansions together currently have a total of 25 chapters. Going into the expansions, you can expect a 25 to 30 hour experience. The max level in the Old Republic is currently 70. If you're not interested in leveling, however, and simply want to play the new expansion, you can get a level up token by subscribing, which allows you to start at level 60, granting you access to the Fallen Empire chapters. Otherwise, completing your class story could take you around 20 to 25 hours, assuming you're subscribed with an XP boost, and more if you choose to do your planet stories as well. If you decide you only want to do your class stories, a good option would be flashpoints. They're a great source of experience, so it's a good way to get a couple levels above your current class quests. Something to keep in mind, however, is that quests scale up with your level, and you scale down to the planet level, so there's no point in leveling up in hopes of breezing through your story content. Level enough to not have to worry about being underleveled and you'll be fine. The great thing about the leveling is how unobtrusive it is. The leveling almost feels like a side thought, with the main event being the actual story and adventure you embark on. Because of this, leveling alts doesn't feel like a drag the same way it might in other MMOs. In fact, completing all 8 stories is encouraged, and doing so will grant you a legendary status. Legendary player status will unlock a title as well as a presence bonus for your account, which grants companions extra health, damage, and healing power. Characters aren't the only thing you level in the game, however. The game also boasts a legacy system. The legacy system earns experience and levels up as you play the game, with these levels being server-wide. The main draw of the legacy system is the bonuses it can grant characters. You can get XP boosts, alignment abilities, faction abilities, convenience spawns, such as spawning in a repair drone, etc. And reaching a character level of 50 with a race will allow you to use that race with any class or faction. So if you've ever wanted to make a pure blood Sith Jedi Knight, now you know how. The PvP in the Old Republic is broken up into 2 categories: Space Battles and War Zones. Space Battle PvP is a 12 vs 12 dogfighter mode where you can choose and customize your ship, components, cosmetics, and crew. You have 4 different ship types to choose from: strike fighters, bombers, scouts, and gunships, each one with its own strengths and weaknesses. One thing to take into consideration when modifying customizing your guns is the range limit on your weapon. Each weapon has an effective range at which it can hit an enemy, so you'll need to plan your loadout to ensure you have long-range weaponry available to you. It's obvious that a lot of thought was put into this mode, and I'd be willing to say that if you wanted to play this game for the Starfighter PvP alone, it's probably worth it. Personally, I wasn't a huge fan of it, but it was blatantly obvious even to me how well made this mode is. It's no surprise that many people are capable of playing it for hours on end. The other PvP mode available to you is War Zones. War Zones are 8 vs 8 objective-based PvP maps where the Republic and Empire face off against each other. There are currently a total of 5 separate War Zones, each with its own objectives, and you can choose between ranked and unranked when queuing up. Playing War Zones will earn you Valor and War Zone commendations used to purchase gear from the PvP vendor. You could argue that the endgame starts at 50, since 50 is the end of the base game content as well as the end of the class story. And as a free-to-play player, you can only play up to 50. So for these reasons, I'll talk about the endgame at 50 and at 70. So starting off, once you finish your class stories, you'll gain access to the Rise of the Hutt Cartel expansion, as well as level 50 plus dungeons. You'll also gain access to new planets such as Alum and Make B. With this being a very narrative-driven MMO, it's fair to say that most of the content you'll unlock is story-based. That doesn't mean it's bad, however, but don't expect too much change once you finish your class story. The real change occurs once you've reached level 70. The new expansion brought with it a multitude of changes and new features such as the Light vs. Dark system and Galactic Command system. Once you've reached level 70, you unlock the Galactic Command, which is essentially just a menu that allows you to queue up for all the game's content as well as access master difficulty content. Along with the Galactic Command menu, you'll unlock Command Experience. This experience can be earned by completing content on the Galactic Command, as well as a multitude of other means such as defeating world bosses that spawn from the Light vs. Dark system. You see, you get to pick if you want to fight for Light or Dark, and once one side wins what is essentially a tug of war, 10 world bosses spawn for each side. If your side wins, however, killing the bosses will earn you tokens used at the Dark and Light vendors. The best part is, everybody participates in the Light vs. Dark battles. All you have to do is set the switch to whatever side you want and off you go, completing quests and flashpoints for the glory of the Sith. Another thing you'll unlock at level 70 are Uprisings. Uprisings are short, difficult flashpoints with little to no story. They're only around 15 minutes in length and are much faster paced than the other dungeon content. You also get access to certain power-ups that were introduced in the latest expansion, such as rocket launchers. And obviously, you have the expansion story content for the Fallen Empire and Eternal Throne. This content is available pre-70, but I'll include it here anyway. In my opinion, the Knights of the Fallen Empire and Knights of the Eternal Throne story content is by far the best in the game thus far. The story felt like what I would have expected from Knights 3, and sure, this might just be me trying to make the best out of a shitty situation considering we're likely never going to actually see Knights 3, but my point still stands, and I definitely feel like this game is worth going back to just for the new story content. But what about after your story? Well, remember that command experience I mentioned? Whenever you gain a command level, you'll get a loot box with a few random items inside. The higher your level, the better the items. You can get a bunch of things from it, but the main thing people are after is gear. It seems that these boxes are now one of the primary ways of gearing your characters. As such, before spending time maxing out characters, you should ask yourself if that's something you enjoy, since earning command XP will now be your primary goal. And yes, raids are a thing. Raids in this game are called Operations and are 8 to 16 man raids. So if you're looking for massive 25 man raids, you're gonna be sorely disappointed. Although these raids are a lot of fun to play through, I have to wonder what future raids hold now that Bioware has implemented a new form of gear progression through Command XP. It's possible that raids end up becoming a stepping stone and a way of gaining Command XP instead of being the only way of getting the best gear in the game, as is the case with a lot of MMOs. I did enjoy my time with the game, but I don't think I'm gonna keep playing it. Once a new expansion comes out, I might revisit it for the story, but that's about it. Unfortunately, the RNG loot box system just doesn't really appeal to me. The game just feels like it doesn't know what it wants to be, if it wants to be an MMO or a single player experience. And that's even more so the case with the latest expansion. The new story chapters are instances and feel like a single player game, but at the same time, I feel as though they've ruined companions and made them feel as generic as companions in any other MMO, and that's just one example. I really do think it comes down to personal preference, however, so you might not feel the same way, and it is definitely worth giving it a try. Thank you for watching. I do hope you enjoyed this episode of the Endgame, and if you did, maybe consider subscribing. Also, a link to the Discord will be in the comment section below. Happy leveling, and I'll see you next time.